This is not the church of Joseph Smith.
Travis Wayne Goodsell. Just got back realizing that if I shouldn't go out shopping this week, I better get my due now. So I went and got it. So I'd have some for over the weekend. Mormons do not know their scriptures. They think they do. They've gone to early morning seminary, institute at Rick's, or BYU, or BYU Hawaii, because everybody goes to BYU Hawaii, right? My mom did. But once we come home from our missions, most Mormons outside of BYU think they know it all and don't bother doing much else. And so they don't understand the symbolism of many of the Bible stories. For example, Joseph of Egypt. He's the birthright blessing son, and so he's hated by his older brothers. And which is kind of unusual, because he sort of usurped it from Reuben. Reuben was the birthright blessing son through Leah, but that was not Jacob's favorite. She had heavenly eyes, but oh, those thighs. Seven brides for seven brothers, heavenly eyes, but oh, that size. And so his brothers make a pit, put him in it, kill an animal, spread the blood on his coat, which had long sleeves and it was long, not many colors. That's the Greek version, but that's incorrect. It would have been long so that he wouldn't have to do any labor as the birthright blessing son, which is where we get gird your loins. That's you pull up your dress, your robe, and then tie it around your loins so that you can move freely without getting caught up in your robe. But anyway, they sell him. It's not the exact amount that Jesus was sold by Judah for, but the 30 pieces of silver is understood in the Joseph of Egypt account as a symbolism of Jesus being sold into Egypt for 30 pieces of silver. Then Joseph gets arrested and thrown in prison and interprets dreams, and then finally he gets out of prison to interpret Pharaoh's dream, creates the bishop's storehouses as his suggestion as to how to handle the future famine. And as a result, is supposed to become Pharaoh. The biblical author, who is post-captivity Jewish, just couldn't get himself to write it correctly, and instead made Joseph second of all of Egypt. There's a reason for that. He's supposed to be Pharaoh, to take over from the previous Pharaoh, having been arrested, accused of a crime he did not commit, and then becomes Pharaoh. So Moses enters into Egypt after becoming the high priest of Midian under Jethro, being told by God in a dream, Numbers chapter 12, that he's supposed to go to Egypt and plead his case before Pharaoh, not just to let my people go. He's also claiming to be Pharaoh. But again, the Jewish author did not fully understand the original documents and the necessity to make the story the way it was supposed to be written. And so Moses confronts Pharaoh. Pharaoh refuses to give up the throne. And coronavirus strikes Egypt, destroying the birthright blessing of the firstborn. And Moses then becomes Pharaoh. Moses has an additional story of as a child he's put into an ark and floated on the Nile. And no, it's not Sargon. Sargon stole it from the Egyptians. It has everything to do with the Egyptian account of creation. But nobody wants to consider that because they want Assyrianology to dominate over Egyptology. And babies are murdered during his time as baby. And so he's a Hebrew who gets raised up as an Egyptian and becomes Pharaoh over the previous Pharaoh because his birthright blessing son dies in the coronavirus. Thus, no successor to the throne of Pharaoh, meaning Moses is supposed to be the true Pharaoh. So then we get to the story of Jesus in the Gospels. Again, a baby. King Herod this time instead of Pharaoh orders the murder of babies. Jesus is not portrayed as being put into a boat for his safety. Instead, the story is that Joseph of Arimathea, who married his mother Mary, Heavenly Father's beloved, then goes into Egypt. A little bit too soon, but the Gospels is even further from the biblical text, so they really screwed it up. But Palm Sunday, when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, then becomes the corrected version of Joseph of Arimathea taking Jesus into Egypt. So thus the prophecy, out of Egypt have I called my son. And so yeah, Jesus comes riding in on Palm Sunday. Everybody lays down the palms. He's being coronated as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the great high priest. Except on Good Friday, he dies. No, he's supposed to be the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the rightful ruler instead of the Roman Empire. Oops. But as you know, the Roman Empire defeated the Jewish fanatical groups that were warring to take back Jerusalem from the Romans, as they got pretty much slaughtered. And then the Christian groups also became slaughtered. And so the biblical authors of the Gospels obviously couldn't have the Messiah come out as conqueror because the Jews failed. Nobody was able to rise up as the Messiah during that time. And so they instead created a narrative where he is Osiris of the Egyptians instead of Horus. And yeah, Jesus gets sold for 30 pieces of silver by Judah. And so these are all apocalyptic literature for the last days Messiah. And now we're there. We had the signs in the heavens already from Jesus, Joel, and John the Revelator, not just with the sun darkening, moon turned to blood, stars fall from the heaven when Monson died, but also Revelation 12, the sign of the battle of the man-child who was born of Virgo, and thus the multiple births. I was hoping to cover it again because today's April 6th, as Mormons, in their mythological manner that they do, created a new birthday for Jesus. And that's not even their promised Messiah for the last days, as they call themselves the Latter-day Saints. Because if they understood who Joseph was, Joseph Jr., they would realize, oh, he's supposed to be Moses. So here we have Joseph Smith. He's born. He doesn't have the sailing into Egypt or anything like that. He does have to leave Vermont because of poverty, but he doesn't follow the prophesied pattern. And he then, his father sees the sign in the heaven on the 21st of September, 1827, and incorrectly assumes that that's the fulfillment of Revelation chapter 12. And so they begin working on the Book of Mormon to explain that they intend to eventually bring out the prophesied fulfillment of Ezekiel 37, which, if you read the other context involved in that, involves the last days Messiah, the heir to the restoring the kingdom of David, as Moses did, as Joseph did, as Jesus was supposed to but didn't. And so again, Joseph does the temple with Elijah coming on Passover, but he's murdered, just like Jesus. Unlike Moses and Joseph, who become Pharaoh. And so, again, Joseph fails to become the Messiah of the last days because he was murdered and sold out by his brethren, as he himself pulled the same Last Supper stunt on July 19th, 1840, as he said, "There are those among you in this audience right now who will betray me and will seek my death." Just he went straight from that Sermon on the Mount, or that Last Supper account, and then with the "Is it I, Lord? Is it I?" And yeah, it was Utah. And sure enough, Brigham Young is the betrayer who goes to Utah. So, not a coincidence there. But again, Joseph is not the Messiah. So we're looking for someone else. And so now we have Palm Sunday. Nelson waves his hanky, announcing to the Mormon church, "I am him," and then says, "We're going to hold a fast on Good Friday when Jesus died, failing to restore the kingdom," as he is doing a hinge point into his version of the kingdom. He dismisses Jesus, Christmas, and establishes his usurped kingdom of Joseph, as he rewrites church history, as he comes up with new doctrines, as he comes up with an idol god for Mormons to bow down and worship, as he demands money, claiming that this fast will cure the coronavirus, as the first one failed. Now he's doing a second one on the Good Friday when Jesus dies, instead of the first day of Passover, which was the Jewish fast day of Passover, when Creeping Death, Metallica, goes through Egypt, killing the firstborn, so that there is no true successor. Thus, Moses becomes the successor. In this particular case, Nelson is setting himself up as the usurper instead of the Moses, even though he's in the position of Pharaoh, which is the position of Moses. And Mormons don't see it. They're chanting, "We trust the prophet, we trust the prophet, we trust the prophet," clueless about what's going on. As this week, we are being asked not to go shopping, to stay home. They're begging us, because it's going to be a bombshell death for Passover week, which starts Wednesday night at 6 p.m. for the Jews, because the full moon, Passover moon, is Tuesday into Wednesday, and so the Jews have it the evening thereafter, and so the first day is on the 9th, on Thursday. And so instead of asking Mormons to stay home and not go shopping, as a medical doctor would, as other medical doctors have been saying, Nelson instead says, hold a fast after the massive deaths that are about to occur. And he announces 8 new temples. A single temple, I've already done the research for when I was trying to figure out why certain countries were getting temples when the traditional number of elders and Melchizedek priesthood holders who could pay tithing were not being met, because one of the southern Utah temples had an article when they were developing building the temple, talking about how many was required in the area who would attend the temple, who would be paying tithing, obviously, to justify the building of a temple in the area. And so Russia was the one I was wondering about, because it was showing 23,000, which was less, far less, than the required amount for the justification of a temple. And so I was looking at that, and then I found in that same article it costs about $40 million for a single temple. And so 8 temples times 40 million, 320 million. Is that right? Yeah. 320 million. Do you see the comparison to 30 pieces of silver? 320 million. Also, you should know that when Nelson took over and announced he was had made a deal with Russia, the ones who have stolen our data on Facebook and have been using it against us, selling our identities and such, as well as deceiving us in that 2016 election and still monitoring us all these years. Max Roth of Fox 13 News Utah announced that he had uncovered that the church had formed LLC corporations and listed those, and I'm not going to go over it because I've already done the videos for them, gone over it many times, and it's in my lawsuit against the church. And so, which was stopped because of coronavirus. And he announced that 32 billion had been funneled through those LLC accounts from sources unknown. And then Nelson gets up and announces a Russian temple. So clear, that came from Russian money. And then they laundered it into the stock market, so that nobody could ever find out where the money came from. And that was the only article, and it, for the most part, died. But I caught it. And so again, 32 billion, 30 pieces of silver. You're seeing the pattern here. Nelson sold us out in Judah, for 8 temples during this crisis, as creeping death sweeps across not only the land of Utah, the land of America, but the whole world this time. Nelson sold out Mormons for temples, and particularly in China. And how did he get the China one? He bribed them with medical supplies, of which he did not give any medical supplies to Utah, America, or anywhere else in the world. Just China. And so when I'm an LDS critic, and I'm telling you I'm an LDS critic, I'm not just making accusations blindly. It's what he does, and I go to Mormon scripture to show the contrast, to show that Nelson is not measuring up to the standard of the Book of Mormon or the works and words of Joseph Smith, the founder. As he gets up and claims, oh, Joseph is great this, Joseph is great that, and therefore the church today is true. But we're going to point away from Joseph and from Brigham, because they never mentioned anything about Brigham, did they? Other than, oh, he was a true prophet, a true successor, therefore Nelson is now the true successor. As Nelson gets up and says, I'm the last day's Messiah. And sells us out for 30 pieces of silver. 8 temples. And so, yes, I'm asking you, please stay home for Passover. Nelson isn't doing it. I'm not asking you to put lamb's blood on your doorposts. And please don't have your door open on the east side. But understand, we're in it. And we're in it because evil knows the biblical prophecies and have purposely reenacted it to prove to Christians and Mormons that there will be no Christ that they believe is coming. And it's an outright mockery of the scriptures and the prophecies of the latter days. So understand this. If anything else, please heed my warning. Stay home this week. If you're hearing about this for the first time, do a last shopping at the grocery store, but try to be careful, because this week is going to be deadly, literally deadly. That's it. So I've sacrificed my 20 minutes of Rachel for you guys to hopefully save some lives, because Nelson certainly doesn't care about your life. He instead is promoting faith magic over science, of which he was a medical doctor, a man of science, and he threw it all away now that he's president of the church that Brigham Young took away from Joseph, and has sold us out for 30 pieces of silver.